This is your annual auction sermon. Steve Pakes and Joe Carmel bought the sermon, and they spent a little time considering what they wanted me to preach about. And they were talking about homelessness, but also environmentalism. And then we spent a little time talking about how, well, you know, they're not really disconnected. Ah, they said, that would be a good topic. And so today, we're going to spend a little time considering the intersectionality of the environment and homelessness. Now, the seventh principle of Unitarian Universalism is that we affirm and promote the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. And interdependence, intersectionality, interconnectedness is really at the heart of all of this. Because there might be one particular issue that you feel really called to work on. But unless we are at least aware of all of the other issues which feed into it and which it touches, we cannot be effective. We cannot effectively address the one that is closest to our heart. Now, perhaps you recognize this map. There are big clues here because this says Lake Pontchartrain, and right here it says New Orleans East Bank. But this is indeed the Crescent City, New Orleans, called the Crescent City because there's this crescent here. Also called the Big Easy, because it's laid back. And this is a map that you don't need to see all the damage, but this is a map of a lot of the breaches after Hurricane Katrina. Well, what's that got to do with homelessness and environmentalism, you may say? That was a natural disaster. Well, my friends. Well, my friends. Well, my friends. In 2005, this was what we might call a perfect storm of all those things coming together. Because, you know, the hurricane itself, the wind damage, did very little damage in New Orleans. And there was flood damage from Lake Pontchartrain, there was. But the Mississippi River didn't flood. Do you know where most of the damage came from? It came from the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet, sometimes called Mr. Go, a man-made canal over here that was built to make shipping easier. And that goes through some of the poorest areas in New Orleans. And when the levees breached,
they breached in some of the poorest areas in New Orleans. The Mississippi River Gulf outlet caused so much damage. If the Mississippi River had been left alone, if Mr. Go had not been there, if the land had been left to take care of itself, most of the damage would never have occurred in the first place. Now, life in New Orleans, for people who live in New Orleans, most of the people in New Orleans live in, who've lived there for generations, live in what are called shotgun houses. Do you know what a shotgun house is? So they look like double-barreled shotguns. They're two-family houses that are narrow and long. Right? And what will happen is you live on one side, and your mama or your grandmama lives on the other side of the house. And then, you know, as people grow old and die, then the next generation lives in there, and the family, just for generations and generations, you live there in that house, going back and forth, and people live. Cool, it is cool, right? People live with their families in these same neighborhoods and with people they've known for generations and generations, and they build up a support network. But when the levees breached and homes were destroyed and people had to be evacuated, what happened to those support networks? People were evacuated all over the South, all over the country. Not as whole neighborhoods, because when you're evacuated, it's hard you can't just move a whole neighborhood into another whole neighborhood. And so those support systems evacuated. And people did lose homes. And you know, homeowners insurance doesn't cover what kind of damage? Flood damage. Now, flood insurance covers a little bit, but usually not enough to rebuild your whole house. And the requirements to rebuild houses because of the flooding often were making requirements to build on stilts that were so ridiculously high that people couldn't do it. And so people just completely lost their homes. People had to leave New Orleans, lost their homes, lost their support systems, lost their entire ways of life. Now, one hurricane is not the fault of humans. We can't say that throwing your trash on the side of the road caused a hurricane. But we do know that climate change is a real thing, and that humans are definitely contributing to this. Like that science exists, right? Who lives in the lowest lying areas around the world? I'm not talking about like Miami Beach and Palm Beach. I'm not talking about the United States. In other parts of the world, who lives in the lowest lying areas? I think I heard it over here. The poor people, right? In countries like Bangladesh, which is, if not the poorest country in the world, one of the poorest countries in the world, these are the people who are most at risk. There are whole geographic areas that are at risk of being wiped away as sea levels rise. So we should probably throw up our hands and say, well, there's nothing we can do, right? No. In 2014, the city of Flint, Michigan, decided to save money by changing their water supply from the filtered Detroit water system to getting their water from the Flint, Michigan River, the Flint River, which was unfiltered, And they didn't have a good system in place, but yeah, we'll work on that. And they just started getting their water from the Flint River through old, poorly maintained lead pipes, and the water itself was polluted. And as a result, the lead levels and other pollutants, it wasn't just the lead, but you probably heard about the lead, skyrocketed. People were getting very ill. Lead levels in children rose. This is the year 2019. There is still not safe drinking water coming out of the pipes in Flint, Michigan. Well, what's that got to do with homelessness? Well, if you bought a house in Flint, Michigan before April 2014, you paid a certain amount of money for it. The value of homes dropped precipitously. I want to say by over $500,000 on average, but I don't absolutely quote me on that. I saw that in one place. So that people can't even sell their houses unless they're going to lose a lot of money if they bought them recently, right? And so that can lead, if not to homelessness, certainly to extreme poverty or to being stuck in a cycle and into other health crises. Why? Well, for profit, for expediency. How did the river get so polluted? Well, from years and years of dumping, the General Motors was there for a long time, and it was always expedient and easy to just dump things into a river. So what does that mean for us? I mean, I don't live in Flint. I have safe drinking water where I am. But climate affects us all. And don't I have a duty of care to everybody on the earth? Isn't everyone my neighbor? Doesn't our first principle say that we affirm and promote the worth and dignity of all people? If we truly affirm and promote the dignity of all people, then all people should be entitled to safe water to drink and clean air to breathe. I mean, that's kind of at a minimum. Are we still in agreement on this? You still in agreement on this? Yeah? Sure? Okay. So what can we do? I mean, it seems a little overwhelming, doesn't it? Can one of us go out tomorrow and make all the changes necessary to pull back climate change? No. I mean, perhaps you heard this week that our president has informed us of the dangers of windmill cancer. Yeah. So sometimes we have to work within a system that is in opposition to even its own best interests, right? But there are things we can do. There are things we can do. Think globally, act locally. There are elections every single year. Did you know that? Every year. Voting is a thing you can do. And voting in local elections is so important. because local ordinances and state laws can start to have ripple effects. So that's one thing you can do. If something is tugging at you, if there's a thing that really has meaning to you, you can get involved in an organization that's doing work. Because when we put our voices together, we actually have a lot of clout. Me by myself, just going to my representatives, meh. Me and my whole congregation, well, that's a little more. Our whole congregation, plus 15 or 20 other congregations, ooh, that's starting to make some noise. Now we can really start to do things. So finding out who in your community is doing the work that you believe in and where you want to get involved. Now, you're already involved in some homelessness work, right? You're already doing things with the West Side Men's Shelter. That's relief work, and that's important work. That is super important work. But if you want to dig in deeper, maybe you want to find out what's causing all that homelessness in the first place. It's one thing to provide aid. It's another to find out why so many people need that aid. Are people losing their housing because the housing is unfit, because the environment itself is unfit? How can we address that? What can we do? Do laws need to be changed? I'm not going to do all that research for you. I'm asking you to do it. Dig in. Find out what those laws are. Find out what needs to be changed. Find out what lights the fire under you. And nurture and kindle that flame. Do that work. We have a duty of care to one another. This is our only planet. I mean, the only one we actually, can live on. It will be here with us or without us. I, for one, would like to stay. Let us take care of it, Gesundheit, and let us take care of one another. I don't like to sleep in a trash heap. I don't like to think of any of my siblings sleeping in a trash heap either. It's time to pick up the trash. Let's make the world a beautiful place. Hashtag trash tag. Namaste.